journey that many of the people that I work with go through in terms of their real deep transformations. And I wanted to run it by you and see if it feels familiar to you. Let me know, okay? You can contact me on Instagram. So, first, they've been noticing, each of these people notice that there's something that they've wanted for a really long time. It's very important to them. So one person, creativity, one person to move out of the work situation that she's in because it doesn't feed her soul. One person who was trying to do anything but what she was really here to do. And she couldn't figure out a way to make anything work and kept avoiding what really was important to her. Another person kept hiring the wrong people and focusing on her work and then dropping her work, so it very much of a roller coaster with her business. And then one fellow who was a writer, and he had just horrible writer's block, even though some he'd written some things that you would know. Okay, so each one of them, when they came to me, had been struggling for a very long time, like some decades, to solve this problem. And what happened was they would have like a box in their mind, a box of what they could do, how they could solve this problem for themselves. And the box made sense. It definitely made sense. It was pretty rigid, each for each person, and they'd been circling around it and pushing up against the walls and the ceiling and the floor and no windows. And they were all very, very intelligent and persistent and creative, but they couldn't solve what was going on. They couldn't get to the next place. They couldn't get to the next level. So this goes on for years and years and years. And the the toll that it takes on the soul, on the person, on the energy, on the belief in self, it's just horrific. It's very hard to take when you're in the middle of it. It's very sad and it's immensely aggravating. And it was for all of them. And especially because they thought they should be able to figure this out. After all, they're intelligent. They have lots of qualities of success. So why couldn't their success go to the next level? They'd already made it to a certain point, each and every one of them, with their abilities, with their resources, with their what they knew how to do, with their creativity again. So then they're tired. They're so tired of hitting the walls of this very rigid box, and yet they don't know what else to do. So I noticed that when they would come to me, they would come carrying this box basically, and they would say to me, "This is how I need to solve this problem. Can you help me solve this problem? It's a problem I need to get from A to Z." And with every single one of them, even though that A to Z had never worked, that was all they could think of and all that made sense to them. And I understood that because on a certain level, that was all that made sense. And then with each person, what would happen is they would they would come to a point where they would have to grapple with the ways they were in their own way. And I use that word very purposely, grapple, because that's what it feels like. It almost feels like a tug of war, uh, a battle, a battle for that person's life. And it's some of it is about facing things they've been doing inadvertently and unconsciously, not purposely, that have continued the problem. Often it has to do with these deep, deep patterns that seem normal to them. And maybe they've never, or for a long, long time, they haven't experienced any other way of being. So it is normal. And in that grappling, I noticed that it takes a lot of courage. And each of them had the courage and the willingness to face themselves. And as they face themselves and as they realize deeply what they were and weren't doing, what they were and weren't allowing in themselves, what and I'm not talking about thinking. I'm not talking about changing their thinking. I'm going way deeper than that to the core. So as they did that, as they grappled, even if there were just like slices of daylight between the walls of the box, if you will, they in those slices of daylight, they would start to move out of the box, and they would find themselves, and every single one of them said this to me, they would find themselves just being a certain way, just acting a certain way, just feeling a certain way. And it was something that didn't feel like their normal way of being. And at the same time, it felt wonderful and liberated. And they would often say, I just found myself feeling great for no reason, or I just found myself saying this thing that I came out of my mouth and I loved it. I hadn't even thought about it. It just came and wow, that was great. Or the writer was just writing instead of beating himself up like he was going to his own execution. So the light began to move through the box, if you will, and they were no longer just contained within this very rigid set of possibilities within themselves. And of course, what comes with that is a lightness of being, right? And a presence in the world that makes a difference in the world to other people too, because they were being themselves, and it created and creates lots of ripples. And then those ways of being become more and more and more and more natural. One client told me just today, they said, I remind myself that this is that the old way I was being is not how I want to be. And then as soon as I remember, I naturally start being more thoughtful, being more creative, being more present. Now, this person has done a lot of work to get there, and he's not he still needs to remind himself because it hasn't fully permeated. It hasn't fully become his foundation again for how he's being. And still, it's working. So that's part of what it looks like on the way. And then one last piece that one of the women that I'm working with was being exhausted by work. She really felt like she had to literally also contain herself at work, like put a barrier up against the possibility that she was going to get overworked or exhausted or traumatized at work. And she did some very deep, beautiful work on what I call addictive patterns, not addiction, but addictive patterns, which we all have. And sh- she's not doing that anymore. She has all this energy has freed up for her life, for her family, for her kids, for herself. So now what we're talking about, instead of talking about how she can survive being at work or how she can survive being a mother, we're talking about, oh, like there are some things I want to do for myself, and I have the time and energy to do them. Now, nothing's changed in her outer environment. It's all in here. This is how I see the anatomy of transformation. If you resonate with this, or if you feel like it applies to you in some way, I encourage you to contact me on Instagram and DM me, and let's have a little conversation. All right.